Somewhere on this planet right now, someone is holding a drink, a beer, a glass of wine, a shot of tequila. It feels like the most normal thing a person can do, but here is a question that is about to ruin that feeling in the best possible way. Where did that habit actually come from? Not the bottle, not the brand, the habit itself, the urge to drink something that changes how your brain feels. If you think humans invented that, you are wrong. And you are not off by a little. You are off by 10 million years. You are standing on the floor of a jungle 10 million years ago. You are not human, not yet. You are something more like an ape, walking upright some of the time, still spending plenty of hours in the trees above your head. Around you, the ground is covered in fruit that fell days ago. It is soft, it is a little bit brown, and it smells sharp, almost sour, in a way that fresh fruit never does. Most animals in this jungle avoid that smell, but you do not. You pick up the rotting fruit and you eat it because something deep in your body has started telling you that this smell means food. What you do not know, what you could not possibly know, is that the smell is ethanol, the exact same molecule sitting in that drink you just imagined holding a few seconds ago. And the fact that your body can already handle it way out here in a jungle with no words, no fire, and no tools is the very first clue in one of the strangest stories in human history. So how did humans actually invent alcohol? The answer starts before humans even existed, and it runs through beer, wine, paychecks, and pyramids, and it ends with a drink so normal today that almost nobody stops to ask where it came from. Let's start with your body, because your body was ready for alcohol millions of years before anyone brewed a single drop of it. In 2014, a biologist named Matthew Carrigan led a study that looked at a gene called ADH4. This gene builds an enzyme that breaks down alcohol in your gut. Carrigan and his team rebuilt ancient versions of that enzyme in a lab, going back through nearly 70 million years of primate history, and they found something wild. For most of that history, the enzyme was slow and weak. It could barely touch alcohol. But around 10 million years ago, one single mutation appeared in the ancestor shared by humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, and that mutation made the enzyme 40 times better at breaking down ethanol. 40 times. And here's the part that connects it all together. That mutation showed up right around the time our ancestors started spending more time on the ground instead of up in the trees. On the ground is exactly where fruit lands after it falls and starts to rot. In other words, our bodies got good at handling alcohol at almost the exact same moment our ancestors started running into more of it. The animals without that mutation got drunk fast on just a little bit of fruit, which made them slow, confused, and an easy meal for a predator. The ones with the mutation could eat more rotten fruit, get more calories, and survive better. Alcohol tolerance was not a party trick. It was survival. So by the time actual humans show up, we already come preloaded with a body built to enjoy this stuff. But there is a massive difference between stumbling onto rotten fruit in a jungle and deliberately making alcohol on purpose. And that second thing, the deliberate part, is where the real story kicks in. For a long time, most historians assumed that farming came first and that alcohol was just something people figured out afterward once they had extra grain lying around. Plant crops, get a surplus, and somebody eventually notices that wet grain left out in the rain starts to bubble and smell strange. That was the theory. But in 2018, a discovery in a cave in Israel turned that theory upside down. The cave is called Rakafet Cave, up in the Carmel Mountains near Haifa, and it had already been famous for something else. It was a burial site used by a people called the Natufians, a group who buried their dead on beds of flowers. Researchers from Stanford and the University of Haifa, led by an archaeologist named Li Liu, tested residue left inside stone mortars carved into the cave floor. What they found was starch that had been malted, mashed, and fermented on purpose, using wild yeast floating in the air. The mortars were beer brewing equipment, and the beer inside them was 13,000 years old. That is roughly 5,000 years before the earliest confirmed alcohol in China, and it happened before these people had domesticated a single crop. They were still hunter-gatherers. They brewed beer before they ever planted a field, which flips the old assumption completely. Instead of farming leading to alcohol, it now looks like the desire for alcohol might have been one of the reasons humans started farming in the first place. Think about that for a second. One of the biggest turning points in human history, the shift from wandering and foraging to settling down and growing food, might have been partly driven by people wanting more beer. Making that ancient beer was not complicated, but it was clever. First, grain like wheat or barley was soaked in water until it sprouted, turning its stored starch into sugar. That is called malting. Then the sprouted grain was mashed up and gently heated. Then it was left out, exposed to the air, and wild yeast, which is floating around basically everywhere on Earth, landed on the sugary mash and started eating it. As the yeast ate the sugar, it produced two things as waste: carbon dioxide, which is why beer fizzes, and ethanol, which is the alcohol. Humans did not invent yeast. Humans did not even understand what yeast was until microscopes were invented thousands of years later. What early humans figured out, purely through trial and error, was how to set up the perfect conditions for yeast to do this job over and over again, reliably on command. Once people had that trick, it spread and evolved everywhere, often without any contact between the groups doing it. Around 9,000 years ago, in a village called Jiahu in northern China, people were fermenting a completely different mix. A chemist named Patrick McGovern analyzed pottery jars from the site and found traces of rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit, or wild grape, all fermented together into one drink. It is considered the oldest chemically confirmed alcoholic beverage on the planet. On the other side of the world, in the mountains of what is now Armenia, people were doing something else entirely. In 2007, archaeologists digging in a cave called Areniwan uncovered a complete winemaking setup, a shallow basin carved into the rock for stomping grapes with bare feet, a drain that carried the juice into a deep clay vat, storage jars still holding grape seeds and dried vines. Carbon dating placed the site at roughly 6,100 years old, making it the oldest known winery ever found. Three separate parts of the ancient world, with no way to talk to each other, all landed on the exact same trick: trap sugar. Let wild yeast eat it. Collect what is left behind. By the time you get to Sumer, in ancient Mesopotamia, alcohol had stopped being a discovery and had become something closer to a religion. The Sumerians actually had a goddess dedicated entirely to beer. Her name was Ninkasi. Around 1800 BCE, someone wrote a hymn praising her, and buried inside that hymn, almost like a coded recipe passed down as a song, are the actual steps for brewing Sumerian beer. Historians think it was written as a poem on purpose, because in a world where most people could not read, a song with rhythm was far easier to remember than a written instruction sheet. In 1965, an American brewer named Fritz Maytag actually tried to follow those ancient steps and brew the beer described in the hymn. And beer in Sumer was not just something people drank for fun, it was currency. Archaeologists found a 5,000-year-old clay tablet from the city of Uruk that is basically an ancient pay stub. It shows workers being paid in rations of beer for a day's labor. That single tablet is one of the oldest pieces of writing ever discovered, and what it records is somebody's beer paycheck. And then there is Egypt, where alcohol reached a scale that is honestly hard to picture. The workers who built the pyramids at Giza were not slaves dragged in chains, as old movies love to suggest. Archaeological digs at their living quarters near the pyramids show they were skilled laborers who lived in an organized village with bakeries and with breweries. According to Egyptologists, each worker's daily rations likely included several liters of beer. Egyptian beer at the time was nothing like the beer you picture today. It was thick, cloudy, almost like a porridge you could drink, brewed from barley bread and packed with calories. It served three jobs at once. It was food, it was payment, and it was safer to drink than a lot of the local water because the process of boiling and fermenting it killed off bacteria that could make people sick. In a land where clean water was not guaranteed, a mildly alcoholic porridge that would not make you ill was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. Some archaeologists have gone as far as saying that without a steady beer supply, the labor force at Giza might have simply walked off the job and the pyramids might never have been finished at all. So take a step back and look at the whole shape of this story. It starts with a single genetic mutation in a jungle 10 million years before a single human existed. A mutation that only mattered because rotten fruit on the forest floor happened to be soaked in the same molecule found in a modern beer. It moves forward to hunter-gatherers in a cave in Israel, brewing beer for funerals before they had planted a single crop, possibly nudging humanity itself toward farming and permanent settlements. It spreads independently to rice fields in China and grape presses carved into Armenian rock. And it ends with entire economies in Sumer and Egypt running on beer, as payment, as safe drinking water, and as a sacred gift from a goddess. Every time in history that people ask why humans started drinking, the honest answer keeps turning out to be bigger and stranger than expected. It was never just about getting drunk. It was about calories, safety, survival, religion, and eventually an entire ancient economy. You did not inherit a taste for alcohol by accident. You inherited it from an ancestor standing on a jungle floor 10 million years ago who ate the rotten fruit everyone else was smart enough to avoid and lived to pass that choice all the way down to you.